Welcome back. Class is in session, so sit down, have a share, grab some popcorn. I don't know. I've never been a teacher, so I don't know what to do. Anyway, we're talking Magic, and we're talking how do we evaluate cards, and maybe how do Wizards of the Coast evaluate cards, because, well, I don't know exactly how they evaluate cards, to be honest, but I think I've got a pretty good idea out of analyzing cards, and that's what we're gonna do today. We're gonna go through cards costing 1 to 8 to 9, I guess that's the highest costing cards in Magic right now, and we're gonna try to find some common things from this card and what makes them good. We're not gonna go through every card, of course. We're gonna go through some examples. I'm mostly gonna use blue and black and maybe some red for the examples here, but these examples hold true for every color. I think this is how Wizards of the Coast, the methodology, I guess, that they use for all their cards. We're going to talk about a couple of things here. We're going to talk about mana cost, and the higher a mana cost you have on a card, the higher risk, of course, you're running with that card, because you have the risk of not being able to play the card. If you have a card for 9 mana, well, if that gets stuck in your hand from turn 1, it's going to stay stuck in your hand for probably 9 turns, so that's a lot of risk you're taking, because you can't do much if you have 4 of those cards in your hand. Those are 4 dead cards essentially, because you can't play them. So that's one important part, of course, the mana cost. But we also have to think about some other things. We have to think about tempo, how much we are ahead of our opponents as far as mana goes, as far as damage, managing resources, how far ahead we are in resources. We're gonna have to think about board state, how far ahead we are on board. That has a lot to do with the tempo. And we have to think about game state. And by game state I mean value. For instance, I have 3 cards in hand and you have 3 cards in play. It's essentially the same, how I would call game state. You have 3 cards, I have 3 cards. Nobody's really at a game state advantage from that point. If I, for instance, play a removal on one of your creatures, I will have 2 cards in hand and you will have 2 creatures. The game state in that way is the same. The board state is different. You're winning on board, but in the big game, if we're talking about the big game Magic, then we're equal in that regard. So, in the 1 mana slot, what we expect from a card, from what I've seen at least, is that it's going to be always situational. If it's not situational, let's for instance take Duress here as an example. Duress is situational. It requires your opponent to first have a card in hand and also to have a non-creature card in hand. So it's going to be situational, but it's going to do something. It's going to be a 1-for-1. By that I mean the game state is going to be 1-for-1, so nothing's gonna change essentially by you playing this, because you're gonna remove 1 card from their hand and you're gonna have 1 card less. So in that sense, nothing really has changed. It's a 1-for-1, and it's always going to be situational. If it's not situational, it's something that's too good essentially, something that Wizards of the Coast are likely to ban or look over or never print again, or something like that. Let's, for instance, talk about a card like Thoughtseize. Thoughtseize hits every card in their hand. So as long as they have a card and it's a non-land card, then you can pick it with Thoughtseize. So that's a example of a card which is too strong in the 1 mana slot. It's not situational enough. If it's not situational enough, then it's too strong for the 1 mana slot. And this goes for, of course, creatures as well. Let's have a look at Diregraf Ghoul. How do we evaluate Diregraf Ghoul? Well, Diregraf Ghoul, you might say, oh, well, Diregraf Ghoul is the same whenever I draw it. No, it's not, because the board state has progressed, which means the tempo and mana has progressed. So if you play this at your turn 6, for instance, it's going to be a useless creature and it's not going to get anything done. So in that sense, it is situational. You're paying for a bit of situationalness, I guess, in this card. So that's what we expect in the 1 mana slot. What do we expect in the 2 mana slot? Well, there's 2 categories of cards in the 2 mana slot. Let's go 2 mana. We're still not at 2. Okay, I filtered out. I'm sorry. Sorry. Let's go to 2 mana. Typical. I think black is a really good really good to illustrate this point here. Because if you go to something like, oh, where is it? Yeah, like for instance, walk the plank. Walk the plank destroys target non-merfolk creature. This is almost always going to kill a creature, and there's almost always going to be a creature in the game. So what we expect from the 2-mana slot is that it's almost always going to be useful. There might be some cases, especially in the case of removal, where it's not useful. But the 2-mana slot is the most important slot in standard Magic, I would say. Might be different in Legacy, but in standard at least, 2 mana is the most important slot, because you're gonna play it for 2 mana, and when you get up to 4 mana, you're gonna play it again with another 2-drop possibly, or play your 4 mana card, so it's very, very important. And from the 2 mana slot, we expect it to do something in almost all the games, because it's such an important slot. But there's some, when we talk removal, it will have some condition where it's not applicable in the 2 mana slots. For instance, we see Walk the Plank here, but we also have some things like Negate and Essence Scatter. These are cards which are situational, but they're really strong removal, but they have cases where they don't work. Usually you always have a use for Negate, for instance, because it's almost always non-creature card that they're at some point gonna get to, and you're gonna get to counter them. But it's not always. And this is the same thing. There might be a Merfolk deck that you're facing up against, and then Walk the Plank won't be too good. What's the example of a 2 mana creature? This is an example of a bad 2 mana creature. It's a 2/2 for 2. Of course this works in limited, I know, but if we're talking standard Magic here, this is not a good creature. If we're talking creatures, then we're either talking a strong creature, something like something that's very aggressive, that gives you a lot of tempo, that's hard to deal with, maybe. Something like an Adanto Vanguard, for instance, is a good 2 mana slot. Something that's hard to deal with, or something that gives you card advantage. For instance, we've seen people play something like, what's a good 2 mana creature here? For instance, Orzhov Enforcer. It's a decent 2 mana card. It's not super, played right now, but I think it could be played. It's a creature which has purpose. In this case, it's to kill other creatures, so it's a defensive creature. And it has Afterlife 1, so when it dies, you gain some value. You're gonna see the same, for example, Dusk Legion Zealot. You gain some value. It's a shitty body, it's a 1/1. But in the 2 mana slot, you can't expect to gain much value, because it's such an important slot, so you're gonna get a little bit of value out of your 2 mana slot. But it's not gonna be too much. Burglar Rat is another good example of a card I would consider to be good for 2 mana, because it does something when it comes into play. Other good 2 mana cards would be maybe the in Boros, there's a 2/3 Mentor, for instance, hard to deal with, synergizes with the deck. Yeah, it's pretty good for the mana cost. That's an example of a good 2 mana creature. Let's move on to 3 mana. What do we expect for 3 mana? Let's go to 3 mana and let's look at, for instance, Murder here. Murder says destroy target creature, and at the 3 mana slot, what we expect from a card is that if it's removal, or if it's a counter spell, for instance, it's going to always work. So, for instance, Murder kills all creatures, destroys all creatures. There's no clause here, destroy target non-black creature or something. No. We expect the 3 mana costs, like Absorb, for instance, it's going to counter any spell. Or more is the Sinister Sabotage, I think, is another counter spell. It's going to counter any spell. Bedevil, remove, any creature or any artifact. That's what we expect from the 3 mana slot. For it to be good, it needs to fill a purpose perfectly. It needs to do something every time. It can't fail. It can't have a condition where it doesn't work in the 3 mana slot if it's removal. If we're looking at 3 mana creatures, for instance, now we kind of expect to gain some value out of it. Either that or it's really, really, really strong. We really expect a lot from our 3 mana creatures. So for instance, let's look at a 3 mana creature in black that I think is good. Let's, for instance, Midnight Reaper. Midnight Reaper is a 3/2 for 3. That's not super exciting, but it makes up for it in the fact that you are going to it deals 1 damage to you and you draw a card whenever a non-token creature you control dies. So it's situational card advantage. That's what you're going to expect from 3 mana cards creatures. It's situational card advantage. If it's not situational card advantage, the creature just needs to be insanely strong, like the green 5/4 for 3 mana, for instance. It needs to be absurdly high stats on the absurdly high, tempo, swing, damage potential. If it's not a conditional win here. So that's what we expect. Another good example is, of course, Plaguemare, which situationally removes all tokens or 1 toughness guys. That's a pretty good example of a good 3-drop, I would say. Let's move on to the 4 mana slot. What do we expect from 4 mana? Let's go to a good example here. Let's search for Bolas. Nicol Bolas the Ravager. When Nicol Bolas the Ravager enters the battlefield, each opponent discards a card. I think this is a typical good 4-drop. In Magic, traditionally, the 4-drop is the highest mana cost that you can expect to get to in any game. Even if you're up against an aggressive deck, no matter what deck you're up against, you're expected to get the 4 at before dying. Even if you don't play any other cards, even you're supposed to get the 4 at least. So the 4 mana slot is where you traditionally swing the game around. This is where your wraths are, wrath effects, or you expect to gain value out of this. If you're not getting value for your 4-drop, I think it's never going to be a good 4-drop. In the past, we've had very, very strong 4-drops like Jace the Mind Sculptor, for instance. Amazing 4-drop, probably the best 4-drop ever printed. Haven't looked through all of them, of course, but Nicol Bolas here. Typical example of a good 4-drop. When Nicol Bolas enters the battlefield, each opponent discards a card. So it's 1 up in, game state advantage. You're going to have your opponent's going to have 1 card less, and you're going to have 1 dude on the board. So you're going to be up 1. And that's what you expect from all. Like, even if you go to something like Zegana, for instance. No, it's not blue. Zegana, Utopian Speaker. When it enters the battle, if you control another creature with a +1/+1 counter, draw a card. That's about what you expect. You expect to get up 1. It's the same with Crazes here. If you play this for 2 mana, if the X is 2, you're going to draw 1 card, and that's what we expect from a 4-mana drop. You're going to be up 1 card when you play a 4-mana creature. Otherwise, you're going to sweep the board for 4 mana. That's what expected. If it's a good card, that's what you expect from 4 mana. If you move up to 5 mana, 5 mana is a bit awkward, and you usually don't want 5 mana cards in your. Why is this showing up? Okay, 5. You usually don't want 5 mana cards in your deck because you're not really sure that you're gonna get there. If you're up against a very aggressive deck, having 5 mana cards, it's a bit dicey. So here's an example of a really good 5-drop. Teferi, Hero of Dominaria. It has a card advantage, which you expect. Remember, we're past 4 now. We always expect card advantage from this point on. You're getting card advantage, and it solves a problem. Put target non-land permanent into its owner's library 3rd from the top. That's a really, really strong effect, and you get to keep Teferi, of course. So it's a 2-for-1, and it's very useful. It solves a lot of problems. That's what you expect from 5 mana. This rarely any 5 mana drops play because it's such an awkward spot to be in Magic the Gathering. But sometimes we see some cards that are getting played there. Another one is Eldest Reborn, which I think is really good. Eldest Reborn solves a problem. It solves the problem of maybe Carnage Tyrant, maybe a Niv Mizzet for instance, and there's additional card advantage to be gained here, just like Teferi. This is like a mini Planeswalker in a way, the Eldest Reborn. So that's what we kind of expect from a good 5 mana drop. It's such an awkward slot because it's hard to get to, and in a normal deck, yeah, it's hard to play something together with it. Teferi is the exception to it because it can untap 2 lands. But other than that, it's really hard to play something together with a 5 mana card. So that's why the 5 mana cards needs to be really, really strong just in by themselves, you know, to make up for the fact that they're blocking everything else you might want to play that turn. Let's move to 6 mana. And what is good for 6 mana? Well, in 6 mana we start seeing things like this. We start seeing things like game enders. This is the slot where if you play something for 6 mana in a normal deck that is not, you know, a complete ramp deck, it doesn't cheat it into play with some, you know, reanimator effects or anything. If you play a card for 6 mana, it's a card that's supposed to end the game. Because at this point, when you have 6 mana, that's all you're concerned about. You know, dirtled around for a bit, you've drawn your cards, you've filtered, you've done stuff, things have happened, but now you're ready to finish it off. So 6 mana is the finisher slot, and a good 6 mana drop is, of course, if it's a creature, it needs to be super resilient. Like here it has both can't be countered and hexproof, for instance. It needs to almost certainly kill your opponent if you play it. And there's not too many of them. There's Niv Mizzet, of course, you can have a look at that. Another one, can't be countered, so it's very resilient. You'll always gain, you know, card advantage back, and it wins you the game. Usually when you see Niv Mizzet, you can scoop because you've lost the game, essentially. 7 mana. Let's have a look at 7+ here, because 7 mana is where things get awkward. Usually 7 mana is not something you play in a deck. Usually in Magic, 7 mana is reserved for things that you reanimate, that you cheat into play, or that you ramp into. A normal deck usually doesn't run 7 mana cards because they're too expensive. So we see things like Nexus of Fate, which is only run because it's a combo piece in a ramp deck. We see things like, what are some other cards? Star of Extinction, which is it doesn't win you the game, so it's a bit of an awkward 7 mana card, but it essentially does everything that you want in a ramp deck. It clears the board completely from every planeswalker, every creature, it does everything. And it only works in a ramp deck, no normal deck will run this. It's only if you can ramp into it, or if you can cheat it into play, of course. Other 7 mana slots, see Pelakka Worm, another strong 7 mana, but again, it's only ramp or Reanimator which would run this. But for Reanimate, the reason that Reanimator isn't strong right now at all is that there's not any creatures. If we go further here and we look at these creatures here that cost 7 and 8, Gishath, like you're paying 8 for this creature and you're not you know, guaranteed to win the game when you play this. Even if you built the deck around this and you have dinosaurs, you might have hit, you know, lands on the top of your deck. So there's nothing right now which wins you the game. For 8 mana, for 9 mana, for 10 mana, for 14 mana, you know, an Eldrazi or something, you're supposed to win the game. Maybe it doesn't say you win the game on the card, but it's going to be so that if you build around it, you're going to win the game. That's what you expect from 8 to 10 mana. Those are the, no question about it, I win the game, and the only reason that you play them is that you either have ramp or that you can cheat them into play. It's not a normal deck that runs them. So yeah, that's some Magic theory for you, and that's how I evaluate cards and what makes them good in my opinion. Thank you so much for watching. See you next time.